right, so welcome to Google Cloud for Startups Virtual Talk, where we host one-on-one conversations with founders and investors about the startup journey. We're live streaming this discussion in association with Cloud on Air, which features live webinars with Google Cloud, and the Grow with Google series, which features startup-specific content. My name is LJ Irwin, one of the program leads for Google Cloud for Startups, and today we're talking about building, growing, and launching startups. Joining me today is Michael Siebel. Michael has been a partner at YC since 2013 and since CEO of the Accelerator program since 2016. Under his leadership, YC has launched more startups per year than any other accelerator program in the world. Prior to YC, Michael co-founded two startups, Justin TV and SocialCam. SocialCam sold to Autodesk, and Justin TV evolved into Twitch, which sold to Amazon. Today, we're hearing Michael's perspective on multiple lectures shared during YC Startup School, a program that delivers startup education online for free. In 2019, over 35,000 students enrolled in the program, and many are on the live stream now.
I think it's closer to 75,000.
Wow, yeah. Amazing. So shout out to Kevin, Adora, and Steven, and all the other lecturers, and
Kyle.
And Kyle, and the many people behind the scenes who are making Startup School a global phenomenon. And if you're joining us on the live stream, you can ask questions anytime on the platform, and we'll do our best to get them answered either live or after the program ends. So let's get started. So,
thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So talking about week four was how to launch again and again with Kat Manaluk. Mm-hmm. She mentioned launching isn't a one-time thing. In fact, it's an ongoing campaign. Often we see founders waiting for the right time to launch and struggle with getting their product or service into the market. Seeing hundreds of startups launch through the Accelerator program, what advice do you give to founders to help them overcome their initial discomfort for launching?
A lot of time founders have a false mental model of what a launch looks like. And I think that it probably just comes with interacting with the real world and maybe seeing launches like restaurant launches and other small business launches. And so I think their mental model is you work behind the scenes until you get everything right. And then the launch is this big deal where you basically tell everyone in the world to come look at you. And so stuff better be good. And like a lot of things in startups, launching is counterintuitive. And so looking at that restaurant launch or that publication launch or that whatever launch you might be experienced with in the rest of the world is actually completely wrong. You shouldn't think about that at all. So if I continue with the restaurant analogy, I would say a much better way of thinking about it would be way before you start a restaurant and you get all this press and you try to get a New York Times reviewer to come in, maybe you should start by doing a pop-up dinner at your friend's house.
Right.
That's a launch. Right? Anytime you've got people coming to consume anything, any service you provide, that's a launch. Then maybe you should elevate to regular pop-up dinners. Then maybe you should elevate to getting kind of a little space inside of an existing venue and cooking. And then maybe at some point you should elevate to getting your own building and doing a whole restaurant. So that's much more what the process of launching for a software startup looks like. And if you're just kind of behind the scenes, not interacting with customers, building, you're not getting anywhere near as much value as if you are doing those incremental steps to get customers in front of your product when it's really early.
Yeah.
And then fixing it when it's broken.
Yeah.
So that inherent fear that oftentimes I have to talk to founders about is that like it will be broken. And what's so funny is that it's always broken. Like it's broken in the beginning. It's also broken when you do whatever press you're going to do. But when it's scaling, it's also broken. Like broken is just the state of the world you're going to live in.
Okay.
And so just you have to get that fear out of you.
Are there any legitimate reasons why they should hesitate or be more cautious about launching?
You know, it's kind of popular amongst some investors nowadays to kind of be like, to give the counterintuitive advice. It's like, oh yeah, everyone says you should like launch fast and not be afraid to break things, but like we're going to tell people now that like you should take your time and raise a whole bunch of money and talk to us first. and then get money and then take a lot of time. I would say that like there are specific types of industries where it might be illegal to launch. Like if you're doing an insurance company and there are regulatory issues, there might be specific instances where it's impossible to launch. Like you're a rocket company and you can't build the rocket yet.
A literal launch.
Yeah. And so, but for the most part, if you're building a standard software company, like it's rare that you shouldn't be doing this.
Okay, cool. Also in week 4, we talked about growth for startups, led by Gustav. Why is growth so important early on for startups? Is it really all about the users and revenue, or is growth just a signal for something more deep?
So this is another thing that founders tend to do, and a problem that I had when I was a founder that I had to really learn how to deal with, which is that it's a lot easier to make your startup into a single variable problem. And if you can make it, I just need to make this number go up,
Right.
then it's a lot easier to know what to do. And like being in a startup is very scary, and so feeling confident in what you're doing is very important. But the problem in startup isn't a single variable problem, it's a multi-variable problem. And so oftentimes I'll get these founders who basically say, well, like, should I focus on growth or should I focus on my product being good? Which I always laugh because it's like, oh, should you focus on breathing or should you focus on like eating? Well, if you screw up either one of them, you're going to have problems.
You're right.
Sorry, you have to do both. And I think that what happens when you focus on growth is that you start to understand very quickly it has 2 components. It has the components of can you get new people to come into your product at all? And then can you keep them? And so usually when we tell startups focus on growth, we're talking about focusing on some kind of recurring activity within your product, whether it's DAUs or monthly subscribers or something, where in effect, if you're not nailing new users and helping existing users, you're not going to grow.
Yeah.
And so it's really, really also important for you to test your assumptions about your company as soon as possible.
Right.
And if you're not putting your product in front of customers and giving yourself the opportunity to grow, no matter what else you're doing, surveys, focus groups, any of that bullshit, you're not learning as much as just taking the thing that's half broken and giving it to someone and see, well, is this half broken thing good enough that I'm going to try to use it?
Right. Right. Okay. If a founder, this is about startup finance and pitfalls. If a founder doesn't know their monthly burn rate or their runway, what does that signal to you as an investor?
Well, I think this is a knowledge gap issue. I think that there are a lot of knowledge gaps in the startup world, and this is why we do Startup School, to basically say, hey, there shouldn't be a difference between who you know, who you're friends with, who you went to school with, in terms of kind of understanding how you should talk about your startup or how the startup world works. And so I think one of the knowledge gaps here that happens with YC companies too is that investors key in on these stats a lot.
Yeah.
As evidence of, do you know whether your startup is, do you know the basic facts about your startup? They assume these are basic stats, but if you don't know that, then you don't know you're screwing up. So in my mind, this is one of those areas where founders can just pick up points easily as long as they know their points there.
Yeah.
And the points are like, hey, there are probably 10 stats that run your business. And like, you should know all of them.
Right.
And like, they should be somewhere so you can see them every day. And you should be conversational in them. I'm not saying that I think that's helpful in running your company. But even if it wasn't, it's such an easy hack to get investors to think that you know what the hell you're talking about that you should do it anyways. Even if it wasn't helpful. I think it's helpful too. And so oftentimes what we're here to do is say, hey, there are all these norms in the startup world. And if we can just explain them to you, then you'll know how to navigate that world and get what you want out of it.
Right.
And fundamentally, like, what you want is not, if you're trying to create a really large, really successful product to help a lot of people, fundamentally, your primary goal is not to change the startup world. It's just to extract the things you need out of it so you can help your customers. And like very quickly, if you're successful, the startup world is really no longer relevant. Like for Google, the startup world is not relevant at all. And you know, so with this, it's just one of the easy hacks to make you look like you know what you're talking about, so that investors think to themselves, maybe I know what you're talking about. Maybe I'll be irrational and give them a bunch of money.
Yeah. So it's like a check the box. But also, founders just need to know this so they can manage.
I think it's important to know it to manage your business, but I think that where people kind of what I find more motivational personally is just like, it's such a good fundraising hack that like you pick up the easy points. Like, I can't make your company grow,
Right.
but I sure as hell can help you make sure you know the numbers.
Right.
It's just an easy.
Got it. Week 5, going into how to work together. This is more about teamwork. And hats off to YC partner Kevin Hale for this one, because I thought this was like fun. I had to watch this one twice. It was really that good. And if you haven't watched this lecture, like, get your touchy-feely hat on, because it was that one. So difficult conversations are challenging, first and foremost, because as humans, we tend to get emotional during these high-stake conversations, and our rational brain just cuts off. Kevin shared a useful model on how we can leverage to work through these challenges in very tactical ways. So based upon your experience as a CEO at either SocialCam or Justin TV, or even at YC, what's one tactical way you manage your emotions when on the receiving end of receiving difficult news?
I'm just really bad at this. If I were to speak personally, I think that I basically have bulletproof up to a certain point, and then ridiculously fucking mad after that. And like, when I'm in ridiculously mad mode, like, I don't even know what's gonna happen. That's when I'll like.
It's Bruce Banner and the Hulk?
I mean, that's when I'll send the email with that really biting language where it's just like, that I'm basically telling you that I think you're the biggest idiot in the world. That's when I send the tweet I shouldn't send. That's when I do everything stupid.
So obviously you haven't watched this lecture multiple times.
No. I have. In fact, I teach something on this at YC. Just because we teach it doesn't mean we always do it well. The advice I usually give to founders is to do it, to actually have the conversations.
Okay.
And one of the ways that we do that practically is, in my group in YC, we actually have this session where we kind of teach people some tools for how to do the back and forth, basically like listen and don't hit the person if they're saying something that you don't want them to say. And then we actually bring up 3 topics and we say, okay, now have a conversation. And like the topics will be like roles and responsibilities. And talk about, is everyone comfortable with each other's roles and responsibilities on the founding team? Performance. Talk about, like, is everyone comfortable with the workload that each other is doing? Or like long-term goal, is everyone talk about what their vision is for the company? And basically, we just want them to see that they can have one of these conversations without their company breaking up.
Yeah.
Because it turns out it's a lot of hard tasks where like the second you start doing them, they get a lot less intimidating. But before you do them, they seem really scary.
Yeah.
So when you're in a room full of other people having hard conversations, you're like, well, I guess like
not
everyone's not breaking up, right? And certainly the first time we did this, it was an experiment. We were like, wow, maybe just 10 companies will just break up like right here in front of us. And we were like, that would be really bad. They didn't, so it worked. But I think it's actually doing it and getting practice doing it that really matters. Yeah. And I think that it gets a lot harder the larger your organization is. So I think that like getting practice when you're younger as a person and getting practice when the team is really small, like just co-founders, is helpful to kind of build those muscles. I would say that we were very bad at this at Justin TV, like horrible.
Were there cameras just being thrown at people's heads, or?
No, we were just not really confrontational. We would not have the conversation until like it was just like a really big problem, and then we're having a different conversation. Okay. We're not talking about roles and performance anymore. We're talking about like, oh, you can no longer do this because you're literally like melting down. Or like, you've got to stop running this team because like you're such an asshole, no one wants to work with you anymore. Yeah. So it would go past the like feedback conversation to the action conversation, which is not healthy.
Does YC also teach any principles around meditation or mindfulness to help with these conversations, for you to take a beat before turning into the Incredible Hulk?
You know, one of the things, so short answer, no. I think it's actually like a really common misconception about YC from even YC participants, which is that like we're not a school. Like we're not here to equip you with everything you need to make your startup successful. In fact, that's impossible. Like mathematically, your startup is not going to be successful. And there's no list of things we could do for you that would ensure success. We're a support system, right? Like the first initiant is you. Like you are the primary agent, not us. I feel like in university, they kind of say that, but in reality, Like the university's acting like your parents, and like they're making sure you're fed, they're making sure you're housed, da 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 da. You trade them a lot of money for that, and like if something happens to you, your parents are kind of pissed off. In the startup world, it's just not the case. Like we're not the parents, we're not the university, we're not here to teach you. You have to be the primary agent. So if someone comes and talks to me about how I can cope with so on and so forth, I'm happy to kind of, share with them, hey, we funded actually some companies that do stress stuff and do coaching and do therapy and so on and so forth. Right. And I'm certainly will always call out, these are things that you should be thinking about. But like, it's not my responsibility to make sure that you get the tools you need to succeed.
Yeah.
That's on you.
Yeah.
Like, and it's interesting is that I commonly use a sports analogy, which some people hate, and I just can't find another good analogy. But, Michael Jordan would stay after practice and way after all the teammates left. And it wasn't the coach saying, you have to do this. Right. Like that came from him. And like he did it when he was already rich and famous. So like, that's the kind of thing. Like this stuff comes from you. Yeah. Like we're here to help, but it comes from you.
Yeah. Fair. All right. So let's talk about building culture. So YC partner employee number 1 at Yahoo, Tim Brady, mentioned that your first 20 hires will set the tone for the company's culture. What steps can startups take early on to make diversity and inclusion a first principle in recruiting and hiring?
So this is one that is counterintuitive because it's so simple. It's just talk about it.
Yeah.
It literally is that. Like, this has come out in a number of ways when I've talked to startups. Effectively, the best founders have a mental model for what they want their company to be when it's huge. And they start really small when it's really small, having the mental model. So, for example, it's extremely common for a company when it's small to say, like, I want to have an amazing engineering culture. I want to hire only the best engineers, right? And so they'll implement all kinds of things to make sure that, like, they have good hiring processes and so on and so forth. And they will prioritize that early. And it's common for people to talk about engineering being important. So that's a very common thing to hear founders talk about. It's less common to hear people talk about diversity early. And what I've noticed amongst the founders who talk to me about it during YC, demonstrating that they're thinking about it, they then go figure out and implement solutions because that's what good founders do. If they have a priority, they hit it.
Right.
And so a lot of the times with these sorts of topics, and there's another topic that's very closely related, which is how will your startup be a force for good in the world at scale?
Yeah.
A lot of it is you start talking about it now. And like what you talk about, your co-founders think is important. What you talk about, your early employees thinks is important. And what you talk about becomes what you do.
Right.
And I think that there are no easy solutions to these things. I can't just be like, oh, you should just use Dropwell and it's all going to work, right? There are no easy solutions to these. And in fact, a lot of these solutions have to be built. Like a lot of these best practices inside of companies have to be invented. But if you're talking about it, you're starting that process.
Yeah.
And I just really think that a lot of bad things happen not out of purposeful action, but out of neglect. And I think if you neglect diversity in your culture for too long, then it's really hard to say, oh, no, wait, this was a really big priority for me. I just never talked about it.
It's so important.
That's not really authentic. And so I think that's a big step. And then I think that there are a bunch of different tools and startups and places you can go to try to find solutions. But if you're not talking about it, no one will ever know it's important for you.
I like that. Especially the leader really needs to own that message and share with the team. And you mentioned being a force for good. I know that this has been a topic within YC lately, especially I think it was Airbnb who really had this conversation. What are some practical ways that the company, Airbnb, or even you see how organizations are being?
I know there are practical ways where I think it's not good enough.
Okay.
I think the philanthropy model is not good enough.
Okay.
I think that the default model that's thrown out there is build a big company, get rich, and then give the money away. And like simultaneously, there's also this massive acknowledgement that like giving the money away is not producing results. And that model has existed since Rockefeller, right? It's been 100 years. And we're not seeing the results commensurate with the amount of money that's been given away. And so I think that is a complete cop-out. So I think things like the Founders Pledge and all those things, great, sure, but nowhere near enough. And it doesn't absolve you from responsibility, giving away your money. And in fact, it's become a default. And in fact, the people who have money now have so much money that like it's almost practically impossible for them to not give it away. They can't spend it, right? And so it's like, I don't know, right? If you're like, what else are you going to do, right? So I think that the challenge that we give YC companies is at scale. Is there some way that you can use your product to create good in the world?
Okay.
We're here at Google, so I'll give a great example. If Google decided it could probably invest no more than $50 million a year and achieve something on the order of 90% voter registration in America. Every year Google doesn't do that, it chooses not to. Pure and simple. It's a tiny investment. Google has every user, right? So it's not that hard. And it would require Google using its own platform, right? It would require every time you go to Google search, you open up your Android phone or whatever, or you go to YouTube, it says, Michael, have you registered to vote yet? Like, you're not on the voter rolls. We can tell. It's online. Like, register here. It would require Google to do some simple things. Like some states, you can't register online. So Google would have to actually create a form you could fill out and mail you an envelope with a stamp and have you sign it and then mail it back. But it turns out that like that's not that expensive.
Right.
And this whole question about whether you should vote will be just a personal choice on election day, not some weird thing about, oh, you didn't register.
Yeah. Or you don't know where your ballot box is.
Another thing, and one thing that I think Airbnb is doing well, I think that the Airbnb founders want to do even more, but one thing I think they're doing well is that they've made it one of their missions that when there's some type of natural disaster, they want to be providing a provider of housing for people who lose their housing.
That's great.
And I thought that's such a great example, and I don't want to like, Google does great things. I'm sure there's things that bad that Airbnb does. I don't want to just be like, but like, what was such a great example was it wasn't like Airbnb is taking part of its profits and donating it to blank. It was like, no, their platform has housing. They're using their platform to break good in the world.
Yeah.
And so I really wish more companies, and we talk about this at YC, we talk about like, not how do you do it when your company's tiny. When your company's tiny, it's probably going to die. You really need to focus on providing the core service. But once again, if we start talking about it now, you'll start thinking about it now. And when you think about your company at scale, you can think, how do you leverage your platform to do good?
Yeah.
Instead of just leverage the money you made.
So we know that increasing diversity and inclusion makes for good business results. Do you feel like that also contains within the doing good umbrella that you're mentioning?
I think one of the things that Brian Chesky kind of communicated to the batch is that there's a generational shift in what employees expect from their employer and in what customers expect from the companies that they consume products from. And companies that are late to that shift are going to suffer economically greatly.
Yeah.
And there are some big companies, I won't name any names, who are suffering right now because of this. And I think will only continue to suffer. And they've been able to keep a lot of this under wraps, but like it's happening. And so I think that if you just want to make a utilitarian argument here, you can. Like, if you just want to say, like, who cares about doing good in the world? I just want my business to be good. I think it's still good to do good
Absolutely.
in the world. And I think that one of the nice things about how much information transparency is that exists in this digital world is like, you now can learn whether the companies that you use are doing good in the world or not.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, I think a lot of the information 50 years ago was almost completely hidden.
Yeah.
And so it's good business. And I think that, like, one of the biggest challenges that large companies have is retaining employees. And I gotta believe it's a lot easier to retain employees when you think, regardless of what settings page it's my job to edit on some product that I don't even know anyone who uses it, my company is accomplishing great things in the world.
Yeah.
That's gotta be easy to retain people.
Absolutely. And I feel welcomed when I'm there.
Yes.
All about pivoting. So what are the signs to when a founder should stop pivoting, should stop iterating, and just to start winding down?
You know what's so funny is that I would almost argue that the more important thing to talk about is the opposite.
Okay.
I think founders give up too soon.
Oh, really?
Yeah. This might be a YC problem. It probably is a YC problem. I think founders so I'll be more specific. I think founders who raise angel funding often give up too soon. And I think that a really big problem is that the high of raising the money is followed by the low of the company not succeeding, and it's really easy to lose the faith. And I've learned something. Humans, in my experience with startups, can maintain faith, blind faith, for about 18 months. And after 18 months of something not working, they suddenly like switch this, like flip the switch in the brain. And they're like, it will never work ever.
Okay.
Like ever. I have to get far. I've definitively proven this is not going to work. And I always laugh when they say that, because I'm just like, 1 month ago you would have said, oh no, we're still on the path. Like, right. How is it that bright? And so oftentimes my job is to convince people to keep going.
Okay.
Oftentimes pivot becomes this really evil thing, because if you're changing the customer you're serving or the problem that you're solving, a lot of the product learning that you've done over the past however much time goes away, and you start from scratch. Now, counterintuitively, that's actually like the grass is greener phenomenon. You feel better, but you actually know way less. And so I rather a company iterate and continue solving the same problem for the same customer and drastically change the product, even throw the whole product away, than to see a company too quickly saying the opposite, which is way more common. We have this product. The people we built it for really don't want it. It doesn't solve any problem that we could find for them. Let's just explore the earth to see if this thing we built can help anyone do anything.
Okay. So it's a solution searching for a problem.
Exactly. And people kind of forget that their baby, the thing they should hold core, is the problem in the customer. Their baby is not the product.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes it's this question of like, how do you maintain the emotional energy to keep going when there isn't evidence that it's working yet?
Yeah.
And like, something about the best founder, I think there's this story that people think, which is that the best founders don't have to deal with that because the graphs are always going up to the right.
Right. Not the case?
Not the case.
Yeah.
Not the case.
And I think also in that lecture, Tim was saying, making sure that you and your team are working on something that you're proud of.
Yeah, it's a big thing. It's interesting. There's ideas that I jokingly call MBA ideas.
MBA?
MBA ideas.
Oh, not like NBA, National Basketball. So you're talking about
MBA, business school ideas.
All right.
And like, it's probably too disparaging for MBA because non-MBAs have this idea too. But it's basically like an idea where you don't really have any passion for the customer or the problem,
okay,
but you kind of see this opportunity. And so you're just like, fuck it, I'm just going to do it because like, it's this obvious opportunity. And I don't know why anyone else who understands the customer really well or the problem really well is doing this. They're stupid. Because on an Excel spreadsheet, it shows I can clearly do this, this, and this, and then $1 billion company happens. Right. And the only problem with those is that when it turns out what happens doesn't model the spreadsheet directly, they lose the faith.
Right.
Because they had no connection to the customer or the problem in the beginning. And so if they could keep the faith, then I'd be like, great, yeah, MBA ideas all day long. But if like 90% of the job pre-product market fit is maintaining faith in the face of failure, you should be trying to figure out what are all the cheats.
Right.
One of the reasons why it's helpful to start startups with friends. It's either easier to maintain the faith with the friend than with the stranger.
Yeah.
So it's just anything you can do. One of the reasons why it's better to not hire too many people. Because it's easier to maintain the faith when it's like you and 2 people versus like 10 people looking at you like, this shit ain't working. Like,
are you seeing what I'm seeing?
Yeah, like it's clearly not working. So it's like there are all these weird, what I've realized is that a lot of the startup advice actually in its core is really just trying to help you manage your emotions while the thing is not working.
Yeah.
And like, if you kind of reduce it down to that, it's just like, how do you keep the faith when the thing's not working? And even more core to that is just, how do you not die? How do you just not die long enough? And I can't promise something good will happen. I can just promise that bad things will happen if you die right away.
Don't die, maintain the faith.
Maintain the faith, yes.
I see a t-shirt line coming up for you. All right, so switching gears to how to improve conversion rates. So this lesson was very tactical about improving conversion rates throughout the funnel. Sure. 4 out of the 7 questions to answer in order to improve conversion rates actually dealt with this subject around trust. So the question is, how can founders just generate more trust with their users?
The thing that always surprises me is how many founders believe that their job doesn't involve directly interacting with customers face to face.
Yeah.
And there's this beauty, and this was our problem at Justin TV. Like, there were long periods of time where we were really stressed out by our users, and we didn't really want to interact with them at all. And it's really hard to build something for them when you don't want to talk to them.
Right.
And a lot of the shift around Twitch was when Emmett and Kevin just started sitting down with the gamers on our platform and saying, let's talk. And what's so fun about that is that, like, as a user, when was the last time you talked to someone who was building anything you used, right? That's like such a novel experience, right?
Right.
But when you look at the core of a lot of startups, that experience has happened, and that was what helped shape the early product. Airbnb, similar story. Dropbox, similar story. So what I would say is actually the number one way you can kind of pull this off is sit next to your users while they're using your product, and talk to them. And I think that, like, it's so much easier to sit behind your computer screen, behind email, behind chat, and kind of like guess and not make it personal. But, like, man, so many of the companies that do well in the early days, it was really personal. It was recruiting users one at a time.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, like, it's also, on the flip side, it's also disappointing users. PB tells this great story. This guy named Paul Buhay, he was the original creator of Gmail, and he was, I think, employee 23 at Google. I think that's right. I never remember the numbers anymore. And basically, he had gotten Gmail out amongst people at Google, and people started using it. And he was so happy because, like, that was kind of the goal to getting it launched, was getting people in Google to use it. And one day he came to work late, and if I remember the story correctly, everyone was giving him, like, the evil eye, and they were like, "What the fuck?" And he was like, "What's going on?" And then, like, he sat down at his desk, and someone came over and said, "Email hasn't been working, like, all morning. You got to fix it." And
you have to fix Gmail.
You got to fix Gmail. Like, we can't work. Like, and he was like, "Oh shit!" And he was like going through and da da da. And he tells this funny story where he was like, "Well, at some point they saw me grab a screwdriver and go to the server room, and they were really scared." They were like, "Oh shit! Like, this is completely fucked." I think it happened to be there was, like, a faulty hard drive or something. But he fixed it. But it was funny because, like, the other half of having this trust of your users is that you're going to disappoint them.
Yeah.
And, like, when they rely on you and you disappoint them, it hurts.
Yeah.
But I think that's good hurt.
Good hurt.
That's good hurt, right? Like, that makes sure that now you're never going back to that server room with a screwdriver again.
And it goes back to the last question about maintaining the faith. Like, the more you talk to the users and you see how much they need it and they use it, and you see the glimmer in their eyes when they hit the magic moment of your product, that's extremely debilitating.
Well, you know, it's funny. It's so weird because when things start working, they inevitably start breaking. And interestingly, founders can lose the faith when the graph's going down and when it's going up. I always love this thing where it's just like, it just turns out no matter what the graph is doing, your life kind of sucks. It's just kind of, and, like, I kind of think that's got to be Michael Jordan's life when it's like, oh, okay, I've literally been, it's now 3.5 hours after practice, and all I got to do before I go home is hit 250 free throws, right?
That's it.
I'm sure in his head, somewhere in the back of his head, he's like, this sucks. Like, there's no one here. Like, and that's kind of the life of a founder. Is kind of like I think that all too often people try to combine the conversation about the tech world and the startup world. In the tech world, if you're an employee at a company, you shouldn't have to feel like you're sacrificing for the company, right? Like, that's a little extreme, right? If you're a startup founder and you don't feel like you're sacrificing for the company, something's wrong, right? It's a completely different world, this startup world versus this, like, tech world.
Right.
And so I think sometimes we're not honest enough about how hard it is. And it's funny, because a lot of times I get told to, like, oh, you should go into, like, schools and tell everyone to create a startup. And I'm like, would you tell me to go into schools and tell everyone to become a rapper or a basketball player? Or tell everyone they should become an astronaut? Like, everyone? No, like, that's a horrible idea.
We need dentists, we need plumbers, we need all these astronauts.
Well, and put another way, like, I don't want to force or make people feel bad if they're not sacrificing that much.
Right.
Like, that's not necessarily the goal for fulfilling life. And so it's kind of like you have to opt in to wanting to sacrifice this much. It's not normal. It's probably not healthy. And like, I don't think we talk about that enough. Like, this isn't a normal, healthy lifestyle you're choosing.
It's getting dark right now.
Yeah, it's a little dark. And I think that like, we should be honest with people. Because I think where people get the most frustrated is when they kind of sign up for one thing and they realize it's an entirely different thing. And like, for me, I see a lot of founders who are just kind of like, oh, this is just going to be like working at Google. It's like, no, it's not. No. I hope it's not. Like, I hope Google doesn't feel this bad. But on the other side, the cool part about it is like, it's on you.
Yeah.
Like, that's the really cool thing is like,
That's interesting.
so, you know, you're in the shit and like, okay, option A, option B, option A, option B. What are you going to do? Like, it's on you. Right. And I think that like all that sacrifice gives you the reward of like, it's your call.
Yeah. It sounds a lot like being in like a special forces, like sacrifice, maintain the faith, don't die. Like all these things, it seems that like when you enroll into Bud School for the Navy SEALs, you know what you're getting into. It doesn't have like that same disclaimer.
That's an
for
interesting
startup.
point.
So maybe
I don't know enough about the armed forces, but I do have a sneaking suspicion that like getting into the Navy SEALs is hard as fuck.
Yeah.
And then when you're in, it's not that much nicer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I think they've done a good job of kind of making it seem like this shit sucks.
At least you know that up front.
Yeah.
Maybe more people in startups need to talk about, hey, listen, this is going to be really, really difficult.
I think that it would help people prepare themselves better. I think whenever there's a disconnect between expectations and reality, people don't have the opportunity to prepare themselves.
Yeah.
Then when they feel bad, they're like, you cheated me. Like if I knew bullets were flying, I would have bought a bulletproof vest. Just tell me. And like, or I wouldn't have come out here in the first place.
I got to sign up for this.
Yeah.
Bullets.
Yeah. But, and so I think that like, unfortunately that means my messaging sometimes is less than inspirational, but damn, I'd rather you be prepared.
Yeah.
Like I'd rather you be prepared. I've done this the other way and kind of twisted people's arms to do startups. And like when they got the shit kicked out of them, which is inevitable, success or failure, you know, many of them weren't happy with the decision.
Yeah.
They didn't feel like they made it. They didn't feel like they had all the facts. So I kind of want to be on the other side.
All right. So one more question before we go to the live stream for questions. This is around pricing. How should startups who haven't acquired a customer or have reached product market fit yet approach pricing?
This is really counterintuitive. A lot of founders think that they should not charge or charge very little to get initial customers. And we tell people just charge as much as humanly fucking possible. Like be aggressive as shit. Charge a lot. Because if you think about the entire set of customers you're trying to get, right? So this whole world of customers you're trying to get, the vast majority of them will neither want to use a startup nor have the problem intensely enough to consider using a startup. So we're really talking about this group right here,
right,
who is willing to consider a startup and is in so much like pain that they'll actually try something a startup's doing. One great way to test whether or not you're providing value to that group is charge them money. If they pay and continue to pay, that's a great sign you're creating value for some group of people. If they're not paying, you always have in the back of your head, are they going to go away if we start charging?
Yeah.
Now, there's a very limited set of businesses that don't have to charge because charging will not be in their business model ever, right? If you're doing social media and it's going to be an advertising-based business, if you're doing search engine, it's going to be an advertising-based business. Don't charge. You don't have to charge. Just give away for free. That's fine. But almost every other business that's some type of service, B2B or B2C, just charge a lot of money up front. And like you'd be surprised at how founders make the revenue graph go up by just increasing their prices.
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised at how many users you don't want to interact with. People who are skeptical or don't really have the problem or trying to use your product to do something you don't want them to do will go away if you just increase the prices.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, high prices.
High prices.
High prices. Helps
So
everything.
when competition goes high, you go higher.
I mean, oftentimes the reason why a startup can exist is because the competition is not providing the service. And so the competition is kind of irrelevant, right? needless to say, step 2, after charging high prices, you have to deliver. You have to actually provide the thing, or else they're just going to leave.
That's fraud.
Yeah. No. But not saying fraud. I'm more saying like, if you're building Slack and you charge high prices, and then Slack's a bad example. If you're building Stripe, right, and you are charging a fee instead of being free, and then credit card transactions don't go through, people will leave. But if you're building Stripe, you shouldn't be thinking like, we shouldn't charge credit card transaction fees because that'll be a barrier to people using it. Price should not be the barrier for whether someone's going to use your product.
Got it.
That's a poor advantage for a startup.
Got it. Cool. So that's it for the one-on-one portion of the talk. Let's go to the live stream for some questions here. So let's see.
Exciting.
All right. So this is, how do you balance iterating on and gathering feedback in the early stage product and trying to get early funding?
This is a really tough one. The problem is that in this world, there's basically a massive differential in a founder's ability to get funding, depending on where they live, where they went to school, who they know. Getting into YC kind of balances that, but it's hard to get into YC. And so interestingly enough, I think a way larger set of founders should just be focusing on product, launch, and revenue than focusing on fundraising.
Got it.
And I think that those founders would find that if they were making progress on those 3 fronts, the fundraising conversations would go better.
Got it.
I think that there's a small set of founders who like to talk, who get written about a lot, who appear to raise a bunch of money and have accomplished nothing. And I remember when I was a founder in my 20s, I would kind of look at these people in their 30s raising a whole bunch of money, doing something that I thought was stupid, and I just kind of felt like the world sucks, the game's rigged, and we were YC founders. And with the game's rigged, it's all shitty. And that's the world. Yeah. The world is, you don't know the backstory on why they raise money and you're not. And so you can kind of be sour about it, or you could take it, in your own hands. And it's unfortunate because I think that there's this mental model that's been produced out in the world that is come up with an idea, build a deck, raise money, build a team, launch the product. That idea is extremely reasonable if you're building a gold mine. You can't really build a gold mine without money and a team. Software has completely changed that.
Right.
If you can write code, you can, even bootstrapping while you have a day job, you can come up with an idea, build a product, launch product, get customers, make revenue without raising money. And so I wish a lot more founders kind of understood that that path is the path that gives them leverage. And when they go from idea to pitch, they're giving the leverage to the investor. Mm. And in this game where you're just trying to extract from the startup world, have leverage. And perfect example, like we'll fund companies all the time who are bootstrapping. Like, especially if they're bootstrapping for financial reasons. If you're bootstrapping for financial reasons, like you've got kids, you've got a mortgage, we see that as a plus.
Really?
Yeah. And like all of our expectations change around the amount of progress you made in an amount of time. And also, I think it makes you look even more impressive. Like right. I'm doing this whole thing as my second job. Oh, it's great. And so I think a lot more founders, their mental model should be bootstrap, launch, get revenue, then fundraise.
Interesting. All right, next question here. We shouldn't focus on growth until having product market fit, but what if the company is doing something more viral? We need to have users to do enough iterations to reach product market fit. What's the good strategy there?
Okay, so this allows me to talk about product market fit. This term has just been beaten to death and doesn't even, the meaning has changed into something I don't even know what it is anymore. Almost no companies get product market fit. Like almost none. And so when I hear sort of founder, early stage founder, like we have product market fit, almost without knowing any other information, I can say no, you don't have product market fit. And if you think about the core definition of product market fit, it's everything is working. How many early stage founders you talk to where like more customers are coming in the front door than they know what to do with? Their servers are breaking because the customers are using the product more than they know what to do with. they have positive margins, and they're making more money than they know what to do with. And everything is bad because they're succeeding too hard. How many founders do you meet where that is what they talk about? Zero. Like, or rounds to zero. And so you need to separate this concept of growth and product market fit. It's two completely separate things, entirely separate things. Product market fit is the result of doing a lot of things well over time. It usually doesn't come quickly. And so you should be focusing on growth because it's basically demonstrating learning. If you can get more people to use your product next week than you did this week, then you've learned something. You've either figured out how to get more new users, or you figured out how to retain the users you have, or some combination. And through the process of learning, you're hopefully trying to get to the point where things just kind of start working. The way that Emmett, my co-founder of Twitch, describes it, which I loved, is that imagine that you're just rolling a boulder up a hill. Mm-hmm. Until you crest that hill, you're pre-product market fit. And so if you are grinding to get that growth, you don't have product market fit. Once you reach the top of that hill and the hill goes down on the other side, the boulder starts going and you got to chase it.
Yeah, keep up.
If you're chasing the growth, if you're like, shit, like I remember we had this moment at SocialCam where like, we got there in the morning and we said, at this growth pace, we're going to buy new servers in the next 2 weeks because it's going to take 2 weeks for them to deliver. Then we have to rack them, set them up, da-da-da. Then at lunch, we were like, we're growing faster than we thought. We're going to need to make a purchase tonight in order to get servers in time. And then at dinner, we were like, shit, we need the servers now, and there's just 2 week lag. We have to move our entire thing, our entire product from our servers to the cloud tonight. That's what it feels like to chase growth. Right. We're just like, every single plan we had for scale is no longer working. And the number one problem is, like, we're not even talking about features. Like, fuck features. I don't even think about feature. How do I keep it, the site up? Like, how do I keep it up?
Don't die.
Yeah, that's where the conversation goes. And so please separate the concept of growth and product market fit. Growing is just demonstrating that you're learning over time. Product market fit is when you shift from focusing on product as your primary goal to focusing on company building and maintaining the product.
Got it. All right, one more question here. Let's see. All right, finance pitfalls. Is pitching investors, even if you don't need the money, a good way to test the viability of your idea?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So I think there exists a set of ideas that there are structural reasons why in the current setup it's really hard for them to work. I'll give you a great example. Ad networks. The platforms have basically destroyed the ad networks because it turns out that like Google would rather monetize every site that people click on Google to go to than let someone else to do that. Facebook, Snapchat, all of Twitter, so on and so forth. So when a founder comes in with an ad network idea, unless they have some really interesting intuition on how that world is going to change, it's entirely possible that they're just pursuing something that's not going to work. So there's certain sets of patterns and certain sets of ideas where like you've seen it a bunch of times and there's some structural reason why an investor can kind of give you advice on why that's not going to work. Maybe that's 5% of ideas. For 95% of ideas, investors have no fucking idea what they're talking about. A lot of people try to use investors to validate the ideas because investors hold themselves up, and I'm an issue here as well, as these like all-knowing advice giving, whatever, Oracle folks. And we're not. If you use YC or any human to validate your idea, that's horrible. And even more so, it kind of violates this idea that you need to keep the faith. Yeah. Right? Like you got to validate your idea. You've got to believe in it. And at some point in your company, you're going to believe in it, and like very few people will, if any. And certainly investors won't. There is no founder I talk to who at some point in the fundraising process just didn't get the shit kicked out of them. And so, and we're talking about company founders who build billion-dollar companies. Right, so if you outsource whether you should work on something to an investor, you're doing it wrong. Yep. They just don't, we don't know anything. We don't know stuff. We don't know about whether your idea will work 95% of the time.
Awesome. Well, if you have an idea and you need resources, come to Google Cloud for Startups. share a bit about the resources we have here. So Google Cloud for Startups has resources from beginning stage, early stage, in the garage, all the way up to your scaling and your chasing growth, all the way up to $100,000. And you can see some of the resources here from Google Cloud credits, Firebase credits, offer multiple resources on the technical side, as well as access to individuals through workshops, online training. Next here. If you're interested in joining, you can join online at this particular QR code, and you can get started, apply, and get initial credits for your for the building of your startup. And with that, thank you, Michael, for joining us today. Absolutely.
Thanks for having me.
If you're joining us on the live stream, thanks for tuning in. Please visit Google Cloud for Startups for resources for your startup, and Cloud on Air for more content. Thank you.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Standing was